Christy, and my project, you can see on the board, is concerning Alzheimer's and how biology and the lifestyle of people who develop it have influenced their risk. The reason I chose this topic is I wanted to do something that I knew I didn't really know anything about. I didn't want to kind of go in and kind of do something kind of usual that I already know. I wanted to take the kind of opportunity to kind of educate myself as well as any kind of audience. And this topic's actually quite personal to me because my granddad was very recently diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and I realised upon that although Alzheimer's is kind of a very well-known kind of disease, everyone knows what it is generally, the knowledge doesn't really go much deeper than that. So I thought it'd be really quite interesting to kind of see my own knowledge and investigate it myself, and as to why not much is known about it, because 850,000 people, I think, in Britain are affected by it, and there's no treatment, there's no cure. Once you have Alzheimer's, you're almost left on your own, and part of that is due to a lack of research and a lack of awareness. So I feel that by doing this topic, I've kind of contributed to that in kind of some way. So a bit of background, Alzheimer's was first labelled as a condition in 1906 by Dr. Alois Alzheimer. He was working in Frankfurt Asylum at the time when he noticed one particular patient named August Detter was showing very odd symptoms. She was often confused, she had trouble with balance, and she would have terrible mood swings. So he made an agreement with Frankfurt Asylum to obtain her brain and her medical records after her death, and through his work he was able to discover, which I'll talk about later, amyloid plaques and tangles in her brain, which are now known to be causes of Alzheimer's disease, and she was the very first person to be diagnosed, which is quite interesting because you'd expect 1906 is really quite recent, and I think that really shows the level of lack of research that's gone into this. So, my questioning detail. Well, I knew kind of, I wanted to, with my granddad's kind of being diagnosed, I was quite interested to finding out perhaps what my own risk would be. Does it run in families? Is it something that I can change in my lifestyle which will kind of decrease my own risk? Is it even related, or is it just chance? So I wanted to look at whether it results from biological or lifestyle factors in life, and also how these affect exactly your chances. Are you guaranteed, if you smoke or something like that, you're guaranteed to get Alzheimer's? These are all questions that I kind of wanted to answer, and kind of was able to condense them into a question. Is the development of Alzheimer's in later life a result of biological or lifestyle factors, and to what extent do these factors guarantee development? So, my aims of the project, first big one is understanding the disease and how it affects the individual and the brain, and wanting to know the differences between the healthy person and the person that's affected. Equally, I wanted to understand completely the risk factors, not just simply know what they are, but understanding them is very important, and understanding why they are the risk factors. What impact exactly does that have? And all in all, was to answer kind of this question is to develop a clearer idea of why it develops. That's kind of my ultimate goal, and I'll use these points to kind of achieve that. The first thing I kind of had to do was kind of plan how I was going to go about finding out more about Alzheimer's. So how was I going to research it? What points do I have to kind of understand and look at to start with? I knew I wanted to have a wide variety of sources, so I didn't want to just go to one journal, maybe just on the internet. I wanted to be able to have a lot of information from different areas to kind of give my understanding a bit more depth. And also I needed to decide where to look for sources, so where was the best place for me to go and get the highest quality of information. This sort of things I needed to think about before. And how would I ensure that the sources were reliable? And how would I conduct my own research to kind of write the best kind of write-up and have the best understanding I could on my topic. So the first thing that I needed to do was to give kind of my own understanding of what it was, a bit of a clear-up. So I feel that when starting this project, that people kind of tend to treat Alzheimer's disease and dementia as kind of one and the same thing, but quite soon into my research I actually found that isn't the case. Dementia can kind of be described as a set of symptoms, which can be caused by any number of diseases. And dementia is categorised by things like memory loss, general lack of brain function, kind of problem with balance. And Alzheimer's is generally a condition in itself of which dementia is a symptom. So for me that was quite eye-opening, because I always thought Alzheimer's and dementia could just be used interchangeably, but actually they can't, and they're very different things. Dementia can be caused by many other diseases other than Alzheimer's. Another, to my surprise, when I was researching dementia, I found that the scale of kind of other places, that other things that can cause dementia is quite wide. There are two particular conditions called vascular and Lewy body dementia, which is vascular is directed from brain injury. So if you could fall down the stairs and hit your head, you might lose some brain function, maybe be confused. That's in itself is a type of dementia, even if it's just having trouble remembering your name. As long as it's extended, then that could be considered dementia. And then Lewy body is caused by a build-up of kind of proteins in your brain. And it's what Robin Williams had actually, and it can lead you to be very delusional and lose eventually all mobility. So this presented kind of a problem in itself for me, was which did I want to kind of focus on? I knew I wanted to focus on dementia, specifically Alzheimer's, but there's 4 clear options here that I could choose from. How did I pick the one I picked? Well, these two I kind of writ off immediately because simply that they're not Alzheimer's, and I wanted to keep it personal to me because I really did want to understand my own risk. So I kind of wrote those off almost immediately. The second thing I found was the 2 types of Alzheimer's. The first one I found was familial Alzheimer's, and this is quite rare. It affects about between 5 and 10% of people who have the condition. And it's caused by a genetic factor, so you have a gene that you inherit, and that gene basically guarantees that you will have dementia. If you're born with that gene, there is no question you will develop Alzheimer's and dementia. So for me, that question in itself has been answered, so I didn't really want to focus too much on that, which left me finally with sporadic Alzheimer's, which is by far the most common type, and the type my granddad has as well. Affects between 90 and 95% of people. So from there, it was quite easy. I was able to kind of focus myself into what I wanted to study, and it gave me a real idea of what areas I wanted to look at. So sporadic Alzheimer's affects, the risk increases with age, which is in fact the biggest risk factor. It affects about 1% of people over 60 and 65, but 50% over 85. The majority of them are actually women as well. And the symptoms include an initial kind of loss of motor skills. You might find people start to shuffle about, they start kind of misstepping, falling over a bit, and also sort of general loss of memory, so maybe forgetting a bit more where your keys are, not being able to find the right words, and this progresses unfortunately until the person is completely unable to maintain themselves, almost a vegetative state, and the prognosis can vary wildly between 2 and 20 years after diagnosis. It depends on the speed of progression. It actually begins in the hypothalamus, which is located in this area of the brain, and the hypothalamus is responsible for short-term memory formation and motor skills. So it makes sense why those are kind of the initial problems associated with Alzheimer's. And then the condition kind of spreads up first through the front and then through the back of the brain, eventually affecting everything. So I had kind of, by this point, a general idea of where I wanted to go with my project and why I wanted to get there. But I knew that there was a massive workload ahead of me. I didn't understand the topic at all, so I needed to focus on how I was going to organise my time and organise myself. And the first thing that I really wanted to do was set myself deadlines. And deadlines were magic for me because, much like Helen, I'm terrible at keeping on work. I always leave things to the last minute. But having a deadline, having something to focus on rather than a vague, oh, it gets handed in later in the year, really helped me kind of focus my time on one section at a time of my work, being able to kind of not get bogged down and kind of maintain consistent quality of work, and also help myself do that by organising my time by sections. So I spent generally about 5 days a week doing some research and noting down any interesting things I found, and then 1 or 2 days of the week I would focus on my write-up. And the last point was continuous research. Although there is not actually a lot of research done on Alzheimer's, unfortunately, because of lack of awareness. There is still quite a lot. When I say there is not much, that's what I think. There is a lot of research to cover. So continuously looking through, even during the write-up, was something that really helped me to kind of constantly be updating and refreshing myself so that I completely understand the topic. So now I had my focuses. I needed to understand kind of, before I went in and understood the illness and something I didn't know completely, I needed to kind of get the basics done, and I needed to understand how a healthy brain works before I understand how an unhealthy one works. And for me, the place to start is by looking at neurons. And neurons are the brain cells in your brain. They control everything you do, everything you think is controlled by an intense network of neurons throughout your mind. And it's interesting to note that no new neurons are created. They generally keep the same ones throughout your whole life. And when you learn a skill or a memory, all you're doing is creating new connections between those neurons, and that's how they work. And here you can see one. They have kind of three main parts. You've got the head here, which contains the nucleus, kind of a long tail, which is known as the axon, and dendrites kind of branching off at the end. And the way that neurons work is they send electrical signals to each other to communicate. So the electrical signals will be generated in the head, travel down and into dendrites, and then you'll have another one, and they'll travel across and will pass down the electrical signal. And those electrical signals are effectively everything you do. Every time you have a thought, those are electrical signals that are communicating with each other, producing that thought. Now, Alzheimer's affects this process essentially. It affects the neurons' ability to communicate with each other. So at the end of the kind of dendrites where they meet, you have a part called the synapse, which is essentially looks like this. And in fact, they don't touch each other. There is a space in between where the electric impulse simply can't jump from one to the other. It has to kind of get to the end of the neuron, and it triggers the release of chemicals which kind of float over, attach to the other neuron, and then fire off. And then Alzheimer's interferes with this process essentially. And it does this by causing plaques and tangles within the neurons in your brain. So initially, the neuron signaling will be blocked, but this eventually leads to also to cell death, which is what causes dementia and the loss of neurons and brain shrinkage that you see. So plaques are formed when a chemical in your brain known as amyloid beta is broken down ineffectively, basically, and produces the wrong chemical. And that chemical is very sticky, which is a problem because they tend to clump together. And then when they come together, they get bigger and bigger and bigger, and then float around your brain and cause lots of problems. For instance, one of the biggest problem they cause is they like to sit in the middle of your synapse and then make this communication a lot harder for your kind of brain. And in the initial stage of Alzheimer's, when you're just kind of finding yourself stumbling around, maybe forgetting where your keys, that's kind of where this stage is setting in. So your brain can still sort of function, you can sort of remember where you left your keys, you can sort of remember like where you parked your car, but it's starting to become more difficult. And here you can see the little diagram, which is quite nice. You have the neurons here, and then these massive plaques, which have been built up over several years, interfering with that process. And then the second main process in Alzheimer's disease is formation of tangles, and these form kind of within the neurons in your brain. And when the plaques develop outside, they will release a chemical which interferes with these pipe-like structures known as microtubules and cause them to fall apart, which is a problem because these carry nutrients around your brain, around the cells, and without those nutrients, your cells just simply can't survive. So once the chemical tau is broken from these, the microtubules fall apart and the cells will die. And that's when you really start to see the effects of Alzheimer's, when you're actually losing brain cells. Like physically, it's degrading, and if you saw it at the first slide, you can see the difference between a healthy brain and an Alzheimer's brain. They shrink by about 25%. There's a nice little kind of diagram of that. So, now I've kind of had the idea of how Alzheimer's works, and being a biologist, I wanted to kind of delve into kind of straight into the genetic and the biological risk factors which could contribute to this, and the biggest one I found by far seems to be kind of like the holy grail of Alzheimer's research is the APOE gene. The APOE gene basically controls the breakdown of those plaques that start the process. And there are three main types. There's E2, E3, and E4. E2 is the best at getting rid of the plaques, basically. So if you inherit this gene, you can actually reduce your risk by 40%. It's really good at doing that. The E3 gene, percentage of kind of average risk, is kind of not really much. Most likely, all of us have an E3 gene. And then the E4 gene is terrible at removing these plaques. It pretty much does nothing most of the time and can increase your risk by up to 15 times. So that this was really interesting, showing that there actually is a genetic factor which contributes to this. And that led me into kind of looking at the lifestyle factors as well, the other part of my question. And again, one of the biggest centres of kind of Alzheimer's lifestyle research I found was that vascular health, your heart health, is so intrinsically linked with development of Alzheimer's, which is really, really interesting because there's actually some arguments that they are so linked together that Alzheimer's might be able to be considered to be a heart vascular issue rather than one on its own. And the biggest kind of lifestyle kind of factor is hypoxia. So hypoxia is a limitation of the blood flow to your brain, so your brain can't get enough oxygen. And it's thought that this can interfere with the base gene responsible for the production of the plaques. And it can also decrease the level of acetylcholine, which plays a role in kind of muscle movement, which is again a symptom of Alzheimer's. And hypoxia can be caused by heart issues such as atherosclerosis and high blood pressure. High blood pressure can damage the blood vessels in your brain, and it can make it less effective at carrying kind of blood around. And atherosclerosis does exactly the same thing, so kind of limiting blood to your brain is thought to kind of reduce the oxygen available and damage it and lead to the Alzheimer's that we see. So the lifestyle risks can be anything to do with your heart: smoking, inactivity, alcohol consumption, diets high in saturated fats. All of these things to do with heart health are also directly connected with the health of your mind, which is incredibly interesting. So now that I've kind of done the bulk of my research, I wanted to kind of time to myself to kind of think about it. I just kind of stopped doing a bit of research, thought to myself and thought, right, how can this be applied to the real world? Because it's very easy to find through research that actually not everyone who inherits the APOE E4 gene will get Alzheimer's disease, and not everyone who has heart disease will also have Alzheimer's disease, which really makes it hard for me to kind of completely answer my question, which was asking whether it's caused by biology or lifestyle. And it's much more likely, in fact, that it's actually caused by an interaction between these two, rather than what I initially thought. And more research needs to be done if we are to kind of find a definitive answer. It also helped for me to turn to my own research. My research that I did, I wanted to look at the lifestyles and kind of the family histories of sufferers of kind of Alzheimer's. And I knew I couldn't go to Alzheimer's sufferers themselves because of the nature of the disease. They can't generally speak or do things themselves. And I didn't really want to intrude on their privacy. I found there's some ethical issues there. So what I did is I contacted some family members of sufferers and gave them a questionnaire and asked them if they'd like to fill it out, asking about the family history of Alzheimer's in the family and the lifestyle of that person. And it's really interesting because the results I found directly were the same as what I found in research. Like, they supported what I found. I found that everyone had smoked heavily at some point. Everyone had eaten diets that were high in saturated fats, and all of them had not committed to any particular routine exercise. So all of those are supporting the lifestyle factors I found, the heart health kind of connection, which was really interesting to me. And even more interestingly, I found that most, about 75%, had at least one family member who had the disease, which again supports the idea that genetics play a role, which was fantastic because it kind of gave me context in the information I found, and where I hadn't completely come to the answer that I was expecting. This kind of helped me understand why that was by giving my knowledge depth and context in the real world. So So, is the development of Alzheimer's in later life a result of biological or lifestyle factors, and to what extent do these factors guarantee development? The simple answer is no. There is not a result. It's not a result of one biological or lifestyle influence. It is an interaction, and that interaction is likely very complicated because you may have the gene that makes you more likely to get it, but you may smoke for 30 years, but you may give up smoking. So your risk is changing all of the time, and to pinpoint what your risk exactly is almost impossible. So it's very hard to kind of understand whether these factors guarantee your development or not. What did I learn from doing the EPQ? Well, biggest one was it did wonders for my time management. As I said earlier on, as Miss Patton really knows, she's raising her eyebrows at me. I'm terrible at keeping time management, keeping myself organised, and I found that setting those deadlines and kind of organising my essay in sections was absolutely vital in me getting it done on time, meeting the word count, and had I not done that, who knows, I probably wouldn't even be doing this right now. Also helped me kind of identifying trustworthy sources and utilising them properly because you find that often when you're doing kind of your research, you'll get bulks and bulks of information that you just don't need, and then there's kind of like a couple of paragraphs which are really useful to you. So I got very good at being able to look over and identifying the parts that I need and noting them down, noting where they are in the source so I can come back to them easily later. And equally, trustworthy sources, I found that the most accurate information is always given by sources which have given detailed references that are reputable of where they've got their information from, kind of Alzheimer's charities, kind of bigger research projects and things like that. And also learned it may not always be possible to answer the question in the way that you initially intended, but that isn't a bad thing, because by not coming to the answer which I had kind of initially expected, I was able to be pointed in the right direction to kind of learn from that and learn more about the illness as a whole, and kind of give me an idea of what maybe I would change in the future as a result of that. So, thank you for listening.
Right, I think we've got time for about 3 questions.
Was there any areas of research that you wanted to include but were unable to access?
Yeah, there was actually, where I covered briefly the kind of genetics of the condition, kind of APOE gene, and that is by no means kind of the only genetic factor. There are quite a few which have been identified. One in particular actually was found in the woman August Vetter, the first Alzheimer's patient. She was found to have a mutation in a gene called PSEN1, and it's involved in the kind of production of those amyloid plaques which lead to Alzheimer's, but unfortunately I wasn't able to include it because of A, time constraints, and B, word count. I think had I had another couple of thousand words, I could easily have gone into so much more detail, but instead I kind of I decided I would focus on the main one.
But was your access to some information not possible because you needed to be like a medical practitioner?
No, I found that occasionally there was kind of points where I kind of found it quite hard to understand the concepts involved and stuff like that, so it did make it quite difficult. But I think doing biology kind of really helped me is because I knew where to find out that information in the end, so I was able to go and learn more and then come back to it, if that makes sense. Yes.
Would you say that there needed to be more research into dementia itself, like the whole kind of like umbrella term under all of these like conditions, or Alzheimer's itself?
I would consider that dementia, there definitely does need to be more research done into dementia, although I would definitely place kind of more emphasis on the things that cause dementia, because whereas dementia is a symptom of kind of other diseases, it's not something in itself. I think to treat dementia, it'd be best to know how to treat the root cause of kind of dementia, so Alzheimer's, vascular, if we can prevent head injuries, if we can prevent Lewy bodies from forming or Alzheimer's forming, I think that's how we can best deal with dementia. Yes?
First of all, wonderful presentation, well done. I wanted to ask you a personal question. Is studying medicine something you would consider?
I'm veterinary medicine, I want to study.
Right.
So my mum always wanted me to do doctors, but I don't like people, so.
Okay, big thank you to Christy.